Let me bring up the clip that you've just mentioned and play it for our audience.
I believe, Mr. Chair, that we just got a notification that the State Department is actually funding a new program to, I guess, with Starlink. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Can you explain that?
I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of the State Department, but what I would share is that we've been investing in communication tools over years that allow for information to be sent into Iran, even when internet connectivity is blocked. We specifically began supporting the deployment, the operation of about 200 Starlinks early on.
All right. You know what? I'm going to interrupt you. We better not talk about it. Okay. So, what I do-
Yeah, it's in those days I was in Iran, Max. As you've mentioned, the first
Yeah.
2 days were so calm. People were protesting. They were somehow, they wanted to show some sort of, objection to the situation with the economy, which was, after all, the U.S. Treasury Secretary said what of the they have tried to do everything to bring down the Iranian currency, which was the outcome. The protest was the
Yeah.
outcome of what they've done in the United States. And then you see the protests turning into riots. So strange to me, because in that particular moment, in those days, the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, he tried to talk with these, with the economists, with the elites of bazaar, as they call it, the elite of market there, and and suddenly something happened on the ground, and they have changed everything. The nature of the protests turned into riots, and they start burning everything. That was so strange for me to witness.
Yeah, and that's when the pressure built on Trump to do something. On the 14th of January, it was either the 12th or the 14th, which is after the internet blackout, which revealingly stopped these violent riots, and the shutdown of Starlink, which obviously the rioters were using to coordinate unrest. Donald Trump came under all this pressure to do something or say something, but U.S. military assets were not in place. He had just kidnapped Maduro. The USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier battle group was still in the Caribbean. The Abraham Lincoln battle carrier group was not in place. But Trump then declared help is on the way. And this fueled the belief among the Iranian opposition that the US was going to intervene, and it trapped Donald Trump. And it was from that point that Trump had to authorize these 2 aircraft carrier battle groups, to put them into place, that he then restarted these negotiations, which led to war in June, and began playing the Israelis' game, became basically a marionette for Benjamin Netanyahu. So that was the utility, that was the purpose of these regime change riots. And we can now see how a U.S. government entity, the National Endowment for Democracy, had kind of laid the groundwork for unrest and insurrection in Iran. There was also the assessment that we cited at the Gray Zone from Stratfor, which is known as the private CIA at the time, which was very accurate, referring to the riots as a bridge to a potential U.S. military intervention. They said these riots will not lead to regime change, but they may lead to a regime change war, and that's basically the purpose of them. However, if there is a regime change war, all protests will end. But they had basically been ended because of the internet blackout. So that's where we are right now in the United States. Here in Washington, Trump is preparing for his State of the Union address, and he's going to talk about Iran. The Olympics, the Winter Olympics have just ended. Couldn't have done the war during the Olympics. All of the military assets that the U.S. can muster appear to be in place. They may not be enough, but that's what the U.S. has. And Israel is preparing its own plan of attack in coordination with the U.S. So we have really reached an inflection point. The only other date this week that I think is relevant or event is negotiations on Thursday, I believe, in Geneva. And this is where Trump and Witkoff and Kushner are telling the Iranians that if you don't essentially capitulate, in Witkoff's own words, if you do not capitulate, then we will attack you.
Yeah. Here is Witkoff said something about the nuclear program of Iran, which somehow is so familiar for me from what we've heard for many years from Benjamin Netanyahu. Here is what Witkoff said.
That it's all about their civil program, and yet they've been enriching well beyond the number that you need for civil nuclear. It's up to 60%. They're probably a week away from having industrial grade bomb making material, and that's really dangerous. So they can't have that. This is something that they have to stick with until they prove to us that they can.
So if the situation is so dire, then you have to negotiate, you have to talk instead of sending a lot of weapons to the region in order to put pressure. It seems that in the mind of the Trump administration, that the Iranian government, the Iranian people would somehow capitulate but that's not going to happen, Max. These people have no idea what is happening in Iran and how people are so much prepared for they're prepared to negotiate, they're prepared for war if the United States decides to attack them. And after all, they're talking about Thursday, as you've mentioned. I don't know how much of outcome are we going to get on Thursday, because it's not that much promising when you you send a lot of weapons to the region. And the only outcome, what is your assessment of the current situation? It's so fragile. I think even a false flag operation can bring a new war in the Middle East. What is your understanding of that?
It's been reported today that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are going to make the determination on whether there should be war based on their assessment of the negotiations and whether they can go forward. So you have two adherents of the Zionist movement who are deeply invested in the project of Zionism. Jared Kushner much more than Steve Witkoff, but Witkoff's family is integrated into this network of pro-Zionist business interests and elites. But Jared Kushner, as a boy, his parents hosted Benjamin Netanyahu. He would have to get out of his bed so Netanyahu could stay over at their house. He was practically in bed with Netanyahu. So this is who's left to make this determination. Jared Kushner holds no position in the US government. It wasn't even made known to Trump's supporters or even those in Trump's inner circle that Jared Kushner would be playing a role in this administration. And he comes out of nowhere. And now it's up to him to make what will be, I think, one of the most fateful decisions of our lifetimes, and certainly of the Trump administration. Will he decide that Trump will go taco, as Trump's opponents call him? Trump always chickens out, and that he'll remove all of these military assets and disappoint Netanyahu, because Netanyahu will never be able to get this many US military assets and this level of force posture around Iran, probably again, for the rest of his life, with a president in office who controls both chambers of Congress through his party, who is essentially a vehicle for Israeli influence through the donations, hundreds of millions of dollars from Miriam Adelson and Paul Singer and other Zionist, MAGA-oriented billionaires. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Netanyahu. And if Trump chickens out, if Trump finds an off-ramp, which would actually be the right thing to do, not just politically or diplomatically, but also militarily for the US, if he does not do that, the Israelis will be furious. And as you mentioned, they could take they could go for some black operations, a false flag. They could just directly attack Iran too, as they did in June. And that's the other issue with these negotiations. Leaving aside the deep ideological investment that the US negotiating team has in the project of Zionism. Israel is just this wild card. And Israel now recognizes correctly, this is coming out in Israeli media, that Iran militarily is reaching parity with its own military. Israel's been gifted every gadget and high-tech investment possible by the most powerful empire in human history, along with a de facto air bridge of JDAMs and high-powered bombs and F-35s and F-18s, F-15s. They have the most powerful air force other than the US. They have one of the most powerful air forces in the world. And yet they have been forced to recognize after the 12-day war that Iran, through its ballistic missile program, is able to fight it to a standoff and force it into demanding a ceasefire. And that since the 12-day war, Iran has not only replenished its stocks of ballistic missiles, it has exceeded its pre-existing stock and produced more mobile missile launching systems, as well as more underground de facto military bases for its ballistic missiles and its thousands of drones, as well as its sea mines. And Iran also has drone-like sea mines that can actually move to avoid mine sweeping systems. Its military, which is mostly developed on an indigenous basis, but now receiving new support, which is mostly unknown to me, from Russia and China, and accepting that support, is stronger than ever. So those who have said Iran is at its weakest point, I've even seen some analysts that I consider to be credible say Iran is now at its weakest point, are getting it wrong. The Israelis understand that. I linked to, on Twitter, an article in Israel's most widely read paper, Yediot Aharonot, declaring that Israeli officials are urgently briefing and pushing their US military counterparts to attack Iran because they are so worried about the nature of Iran's ballistic missile program. So these riots and all the which were triggered partly by the economic assault by the US on Iran's economy through sanctions. They projected this, they created this sense that Iran is weak, that Iran's on the ropes internally. But the Israelis understand that militarily Iran is getting too strong. And that's why I think even if there are negotiations now that succeed, it's only delaying the inevitable. As long as there is this greater Israel project right there in the region, war is ultimately inevitable with Iran, and the pressure on any US president, the preponderance of pressure, particularly on a Republican like Trump, will simply be insurmountable for that president to attack.
We've seen that the Pentagon finally is talking about that the war with Iran gonna take, that's gonna prolong. That's gonna be it's not gonna be a quick war, a quick attack. That's gonna happen, and the huge casualties may this war bring to the United States. And here is the Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Dan Kane. He warned Donald Trump himself, that considering that what would be the main goal. And in your opinion, when it comes to the Trump administration, how do you see the combination of forces? On one side, we see General Kane coming out and saying, if you start this war, it's going to be a continuous war. It's going to be a new war in the Middle East that may take a decade. On the other hand, you see people like, Lindsey Graham, people like those people who are mostly pro-war, and they want to bring a new war in the Middle East in favor of Israel and using the United States as a proxy against Iran. How do you see the combination of these forces within the Trump administration?
Well, let's start with Lindsey Graham. He's another vehicle for Israeli influence. You can clearly see that. He's made 2 trips to Tel Aviv already this year. And while he makes his trips to Tel Aviv, Netanyahu makes his trips to Washington. They trade places. And it's kind of like this this shell game, this 3-card Monte game, where you can't tell who's the Israeli and who's the American. But by trading places, they create this chorus that Trump hears that he must attack Iran. Netanyahu's meeting with all his allies in Washington. He's providing Trump and his team with all sorts of intelligence, hyping up Iran's imminent nuclear capacity. Steve Witkoff declared this week that Iran's a week away from a nuclear bomb. That's obviously coming from the Israelis. As we speak right now, at 3 o'clock, Marco Rubio, National Security Council Director and Secretary of State, has convened an Iran meeting, and the CIA Director, John Ratcliffe, is right in there. This other Lindsey Graham-like figure who, as I wrote about last year, is known inside the administration as the Mossad stenographer, because he just gets briefings from the Mossad and then feeds it right to the president. Susie Wiles is the chief of staff, who makes sure that there are no dissenters in these meetings. Tucker Carlson, who fresh off dismantling U.S. ambassador to Israel, or I can't tell, is he the Israeli ambassador to the U.S.? Mike Huckabee in Jerusalem, in a 2-hour interview, appeared at the White House. And I mean, anybody could guess that why Tucker was there. He wasn't there to, eat Burger King with Donald Trump. He was there to lobby Trump against a war on Iran and warn of the consequences, and to stand in the shoes of Charlie Kirk, the late TPUSA leader, who last year tried to warn Trump and was rebuked by the president himself very angrily for warning about war with Iran. I think I was the first journalist to reveal that. So there are competing forces, but these are political forces. Pete Hegseth, he's the Secretary of War, what was once known as the Secretary of Defense. I like this new title, actually. It's more honest about what the Pentagon is. Hegseth will do anything that these forces tell him to do. He just wants to maintain his position. He was recently training with some military cadets, benching what appeared to be like fake weights, claiming he was benching 350 pounds. I don't know if he's on a cycle of steroids or the weights were fake, but it doesn't matter. These kind of spectacles show that Pete Hegseth is not serious, and that the serious people are in the procurement wing of the Pentagon, who have to determine how many military assets are available, and especially how much standoff capacity the U.S. can actually muster, and for how long, against a military like Iran. The serious people in the Pentagon are in the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, military intelligence, who determine what Iran's capacity is, its own standoff capacity, its ability to withstand strikes, etc. They are not at the top, at the political level. And then you have the Pentagon brass. These are the generals, including Dan Kane, who have had to deal with the DIA and deal with the procurement side and know the numbers. They're sort of like numbers guys. Kane, I assume, also is more ideologically MAGA than Mark Milley or other previous CENTCOM chiefs, but he's looking at the cold, hard facts, and he is recognizing that this war may not be winnable with some lightning assault on Iran, that it could drag out for weeks or months without even achieving regime change, killing possibly tens of thousands, causing an economic crisis globally, possibly destabilizing regional family dictatorships in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. But for him, it's a question of whether it's militarily winnable or not. I don't think he's even considering political or moral questions. It's whether they can do the job and what Iran can do back. And he leaked, or someone around him leaked, to three major outlets in the US, that the Pentagon Joint Chiefs essentially are concerned, if not in opposition to launching this war. So for Trump to do this, it would just be another confirmation that this is a war for Israel, for the ideological elements that have captured the White House and which do not represent the American public, which opposes this war in vast numbers. About 70% of the US public opposes this war. I think 95% of registered Democrats oppose it. It's not representing even the American military, which has now expressed its opposition. It's representing this faction of ideological zealots who are adherents to the project of Greater Israel and the fundamentally destabilizing philosophy of Zionism.